The title of my talk is The Art of Meaning, the Art of Survival. About 3 years ago, one morning, the head of the Nyrox Foundation and Sculpture Park, Benji Lieben, gave me a call. He was quite distressed, irate. In short, he told me that the water supply in the entire region, that is the cradle of humankind, was now so polluted that he firstly considered closing the entire sculpture park. Secondly, that this area might very well lose its status as a World Heritage Site, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So, if, as the great French philosopher Bachelard says, water is a mirror, and if we cannot even take care of the water in the cradle of humankind, what does that say about us, about our future? Well, this brings me to a second question. Why phone an artist for such a grave issue? I mean, I cannot really come and help you put in a new water purifier. The arts are not functional in any straightforward sense. They're not operationally significant. Besides, since approximately the 19th century with the invention of photography, absolutely no one really needs artists to represent the world in the way that it already exists anymore. You all have cell phone cameras. News is uploaded, as it happens, onto the internet. Lastly, the sciences are doing a fantastic job of telling us what is wrong with the environment and telling us what we can do about it. In relation just to the global water scarcity and issues surrounding water, and I won't read all of these statistics, there's too much of it. I soon found, for example, 1.4 million lives per year can be saved simply by improving access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. The second one is even worse. Well, the third one. Better water, sanitation, and hygiene could prevent the deaths of around 1,000 children under 5 per day. These are shocking statistics. I mean, I can see you all rising up out of your seats, running out there and making a difference. And yet, it's not that simple. We live in a world where we all know hunger. We know that it exists. We know that violence exists. We know that inequity is perhaps the hallmark of our age. And even worse, we have enough knowledge and resources to stop it, but we don't. So let me take you along my own journey and tell you how I think the arts can help alleviate the situation somewhat. I grew up in a town called Boksburg on the east rand of Johannesburg, a tough mining town, industrial town I would call it, on the east rand of Johannesburg. Those were the heady days of apartheid, and quite frankly, if you switched on the news, you went to school, you opened a newspaper, the first thing you read was the war against our enemies, and how this war was absolutely central to maintaining our culture, our way of life, our very survival as a group of individuals. And yet, on the other hand, when I went home, I also had a mother who sat in the studio doing something rather extraordinary. She was a professional artist, contemporary artist. She made works of art that seemed to belong nowhere in this tough, hostile world. Gold toilets, large paintings. And I really couldn't figure out what all of this was about. Soon, she started taking me along to exhibitions. And there, I very quickly noticed something else happening. Firstly, audiences and artists were diverse. They came together in these spaces. They made works of art, and they engaged in dialogue about meaning. What do these things mean? There were no wrong or right answers. No one started with any advantage, so to speak. These were, if you like, other ways of seeing and understanding the world through which new forms of meaning were ultimately constructed through dialogue. In general, the term transformative applies. So, of course, I became an artist. And in the process, I ended up doing a whole bunch of things that most people never do. For example, here I'm at the Pacific Ocean, pushing a block of ice, the weight of my body, into the sea. On the one hand, perhaps funerary rites. On the other hand, a return to source. Perhaps also just a cheeky take on rising sea levels. I also covered my body in 23-karat gold leaf one day and had friends and family come over and bury me alive. I have delivered conference papers about art and climate issues from one of the last remaining sources of clean, pristine water in the cradle of humankind. I've spent hours and hours drawing in the ocean, even though I did find a small crocodile washed out to shore one day as well, mauled and drowned. Throughout this period of making work, I did find that I was rather unsatisfied with the common definition of art out there. What it is people think artists do and why they think it's really not that important. In brief, people felt that art was decorative, that it was an add-on. It was not necessary as part of what we term the struggle for survival generally. I then decided that I would have to study the matter slightly more, and I was lucky enough to be awarded a Commonwealth Scholarship to complete my PhD in the UK. During the time that I was there, I engaged with the work of Charles Darwin. We all understand who Darwin is today, but I thought to myself, if there's one person that could teach me a thing or two about the world of beauty and how it fits into the natural world, this is where I should start. So I'll spare you most of the academic details, but let's begin with something rather simple. Firstly, Darwin couldn't draw. This was a major, major issue for him in his life. It was a professional setback as well because it meant that he had to have someone else draw all the natural specimens, for example. Secondly, Darwin was horrified by the sheer violence and brutality of the struggle for survival. He saw signs of it everywhere, even in his own home, where he lost 3 children at a very young age to various sicknesses. This left a lifelong mark on him, and he couldn't quite deal with the grief. It stayed with him forever. And then, beauty. So, if the struggle for survival is purely functional, what to do with all this beauty in the world? Where does this come from? What does it matter? Why is it here? Well, Darwin's detractors thought that this was proof of God, no less. They said, these things are here solely so that people may enjoy them. They are here for the benefit of humanity. Of course, Darwin couldn't let that go. And he spent a long time studying the appearance of beauty in nature. Now, I'm going to cut this whole thing very much short now and tell you, consider dating. Have you, in fact, tried to date someone you find physically repulsive? It is very hard going, no matter how wealthy they are. Okay? This is it, you know? The thing that you can take away from this is that beauty really begins with what Darwin called the forces of sexual selection. It begins as choice. You can choose a mate. And from something as simple as that choice, diversity, call it a diversity machine, begins. And it far surpasses the narrow logic of survival only. Soon we're all wearing white and tan. Soon we have strange hats. Even animals adapt to a point well beyond the merely functional. Now, beyond the question of what is functional and what is not functional is the issue of choice. This notion of choice is central. We make decisions. And once we make one decision, we make another. And soon we want to make a lot of decisions. And from this, diversity in the world is born. The great flowering of beauty on the earth occurs. And more than any other thing, This is about meaning. Soon the question becomes one of existence itself. That means art and beauty gives meaning to our lives beyond being merely survivors of the struggle. This is an extraordinary thing. It's one we often forget. As a friend of mine once said, well, what do we fight for if not for these kinds of decisions, for beautiful things, for the world that exceeds our modest expectations of it? None of us want to be statistics only. And yet, even in my own life, when my mother passed from the COVID pandemic, we weren't allowed to see her. She was very quickly part of a statistical group of people who now had to be separated. They became black and white stats only. They were not just names on a list. They were us. Somewhere in between there is where meaning functions. That's where it is not simply a question of survival. That's where it's a question of how it affects me, how I'm related to issues. So coming back then to Benji's discussion with me that morning, we quickly roped in co-curator Bashak Shenova, who sat somewhere in the audience as well. And we said, let us think about a project that is more than just an art project. Let us establish what we could think of as being an ecology. A unified approach that doesn't just isolate the arts, but also includes scientists in the discussion, the community who live in this area, the various scholarly experts who study these things. Let's bring everyone to the table and start real dialogue about the meaning of these materials, not simply as statistical things or scientific fact, but as stories, as materials that have deep relationship to our very common humanity, to our particular existence as individuals even. The stories we tell each other about water and soil, the symbols they occupy or the way they attach to symbols in our lives, for example. Because we understood from the start that if we wanted to have meaningful change, we ultimately have to change what things mean. If we want people to respond to the question of water, for example, in a meaningful way, we have to show them how this substance is more than simply a resource to be exploited, but something that is intimately part of their own systems of meaning, their very being. This requires more than simply citing the statistics. The arts and the sciences do need to unite to tell this story. Thank you very much.